Right, next up, sticking in the international realm, we're going to look now to Tier 2 in Europe with the Rugby Europe Championship, which is getting underway. Is it next week or the week after? I think it's this coming weekend. So yeah, when we're looking ahead to that, it's a bit of an awkward format, and the last side in the competition is still undecided heading to round one. I have
that's right. From last year they have a promotion and relegation playoff between tiers 1 and 2, and because they had to wrap up their last tournament earlier this month with the Spain-Portugal games and then the written off game, which Belgium ended up suffering. They literally have to play in a playoff game now, Belgium, because their government's COVID restrictions prevented them from going abroad. They got given a 28-0 defeat to Romania, which ended up chucking Romania up into second and leaving Belgium bottom of the rung.
And still not playing rugby, now in doubt for the tournament.
Now they have to play a playoff, which they have to play by June to get into this competition.
Suffer a 28-0 walkover again.
Yeah, who knows? But the bottom line is they can't play the fixture against the bottom team every week because they don't know who it is. They're going to play on with the tournament, but they can't play. They can't play the tournament. They can't play that game of the tournament anyway. So it's just going to be 2 games a week with one team having a bye, and then presumably
a load of games.
Whenever the qualifier happens,
4-day turnarounds for the lowest ranked team in the competition.
Everyone just gets to swing at the qualifier team week on week on week. This tournament often comes up with funny format things and too often makes headlines for non-on-the-pitch reasons.
Indeed.
But it's just another quirky one. The big thing, though, with this tournament this year is that it is the first half of a World Cup qualifier.
Indeed, and that's the intrigue for a lot of these teams, and the carrot for a lot of these teams as well. It's worth so much to them to get to it's worth so much to get for a Tier 2 side to get to the World Cup in the first place, because a lot of the remuneration is such that of the 20 teams going, it's equally divided, which is kind of punitive on a massive team like France. They would feel, certainly France would feel, but it's really important for teams like Tonga or teams like Georgia, Spain, any of these teams that are looking to try and get in. And with the World Cup being in France, like the last time it was in France, Portugal got in, they're in here too. There's a lot to compete for in terms of World Cup qualification.
Indeed, and there's 2 automatic places, so this will be done at the end of next season's table. There'll be an aggregate table of the 2 competitions, this year's Rugby Europe Championship and next year's Rugby Europe Championship, and an aggregate table will decide which 2 teams get automatic qualifier places. So that's Europe 1, the favourites would be Georgia.
The golden ticket.
The golden ticket, that's into the World Cup, no questions asked. Europe 2, likewise, into the World Cup in a lower seed. The groups are already decided, Europe 1 and Europe 2. I'm sure you'll see in the pools, I don't have them in front of me, but they're in one such group or other. And then there's a third team that qualifies for the Repechage, the little round robin tournament at the end of all of the qualifiers, which will take place between like an America's team, an Asian team, I think an African team maybe, and the European team, which now that Fiji qualify automatically and 2 Oceania places can be taken by Tonga and Samoa, that Repechage tournament is going to be a bit more open.
Wide open.
So the third qualifying team is going to have a chance, and that'll definitely be for even Russia. That'll be seen as achievable. 3rd place in this scrap. Georgia probably first. Spain probably second.
Catch Georgia with a few ineligible players, and then suddenly
ineligible players always throw up an interesting thing. But there's obviously tons of stakes going into this competition. Starting slow can put yourself really with your backs to the wall. So 100%. It's important that all the teams are ready to go here and get things right. And I think we are just going to run through the teams ahead of the weekend, and then obviously a quick look at the 2 fixtures that are happening. We're going to start with the big dogs, which are Georgia.
And Georgia are literally and figuratively the big dogs in this tournament. They win it pretty routinely year on year. It had been that Romania were the ones putting it up to them for a few years, but that really has not been the case for quite a few years.
It's been put to bed since probably pre-2015 World Cup.
Romania have been dropping somewhat like a stone as far as their form's concerned, and Georgia have been just by and large just way too physical for the majority of teams in this tournament. Their scrum has been mighty. they'll need to expand their game a bit. Like they certainly need to. Like you were making the point in the Autumn Nations Cup, they had old heads in their front row who were starting games, who weren't getting on top, and then their young, dynamic former under 21 guys were scrummaging aggressively too when they came off the bench.
There's actually good news in that regard, which is the for the first time ever, I think I'm happy about a top Couture's club preventing some players from playing international rugby.
And this is the older Georgians.
Gigashvili and Nariashvili in their French clubs, and I think another front rower have been kept on
despite the Rugby Europe. They won't be released to play Rugby Europe games.
At least initially, some of these games they're going to be playing in the top couture squad because those clubs are in relegation threatened at the moment, and that's just they French
dig
clubs,
their holes
whenever they see that on the horizon, they just completely lose sight of anything else.
Yes, indeed.
And while most of the time that's a terrible frustration, in this instance, I'm okay with it because I think Georgia desperately needed to get those guys out because their scrum, it hasn't been dominating. Even against Russia. I mean, Russia scored a try against them in that recent game by taking a scrum under their post.
There you go.
You would not have seen that in this competition in years gone by.
No. Scrumming the Georgians usually an absolute no-go for all these teams in it. And it should still be.
Still is at under 20 level, even against better sides at under 20 level. So I think the Georgians desperately need to get some young guys in there. But I think they know as well as anybody, and I think you could tell by their body language after the Russia game, which was the end of last year's competition, which they played earlier this month, where they got a really scrappy win. I think it was something like 16-7, 0-all at half time, and the full time whistle blew, and they'd won another Grand Slam. And you could see in their body language that they were just a bit well, and they were a bit like, we know we've just been in this Autumn Nations Cup, we know we have to do better than this, we have to move the ball, we have to strike, and too often, when the ball does have to go through the hands, they struggle to do it. There are drops. They get cases of the drops like nobody's business.
A curious case of the drops for the Georgians.
Sharakadze still in there, Kamaladze, these guys have been in there for ages and ages and never quite done it.
Just a general lack of pace. Obviously, at fullback, Matiashvili, is it? Can be very dynamic, but is frequently working with just no pace outside him on the wings. They do have good innovations where they put some of their dynamic ball carrying back rows on the extremities, and they find a lot of purchase in this tournament, especially because they can break tackles and kind of flood the wings. So they're generally better at exiting. And they need to mix up their kicking game a little because they know that their kicking game is subpar. Yeah, it's really subpar. Their kicking game is they get away with it in this tournament, but it is that it lets them down when they face tier 1 sides
because they are correctly working on their offloading game, and I think you saw a couple of occasions in the Nations Cup when they weren't getting absolutely lashed on by the bad weather. They were trying a few offloads. It was a little clunky but improving, and I think that's
the try they scored against Ireland was great little offload in the midfield, and then a brilliant line cut by their 13. A lot more of that to be seen. There's a lot more scope for it in this tournament when they're dominant, but I think the encouraging thing about last year is that their reaction to that win in the Grand Slam, and coupled with the Autumn Nations performances, they know roughly where the level is that they need to be, so they have pointed things to work on. They still have a very young 10 who's playing regular rugby in the top
and
tours.
a young 9 playing good rugby as well, and he's scored some nice tries for them. I'm trying to remember his name. What's it?
Lobsendadze, and then Tato Absendadze, I think. He's the young 10.
They're a good set of halfbacks. The kicking game, as you say, is a key, crucial component because it adds it all together. I mean, you need the power game, you need the dynamism, you need the scrum to be on its blow because that's your strength.
But if you're looking at Munster circa 06 or something as the mould of a pack-led physical team, you have one of the best kicking out halves in the world who's kicking them into the right areas. It just
doesn't work without it. And even working on that class offloading game and that explosive dynamism in the midfield, that's important. They have to do that. Their offloading hasn't been good enough and their passing hasn't been good enough, but adding the kicking layer on top of that is important as well. And Georgia, they need to they know that their overall mission is to make the leap from tier 2 to tier 1, and it takes a lot of progress, as they well know, having played more games against tier 1 sides in recent times. That making that step up is a key work on for them. It involves improving.
I think they are committed to that. They probably will blood some players. I'll be excited to see how they go in this tournament because, as I've said before, they are one of 5 teams in world rugby for whom rugby union is their national sport. The others being, I don't know the name,
Wales,
Fiji, Wales, New Zealand, and
I think Madagascar.
Yeah. The curious case of the Madagascars being there. But there are only 5 teams for whom rugby's their de facto national sport, and Georgia are one of them. So I think they are committed to the idea of like, yeah, they have the physicality to cope with tier 1 level, but they are lacking in all the other areas, and they are trying to work on getting better at all of them. So yeah, hopefully we'll see a bit more of that, and I expect they are they are favourites for this tournament, and they will be looking to kind of another Grand Slam and secure that World Cup position is exactly what their main mission is. But beyond that, building their game and growing their game in advance of the next World Cup.
To try and compete with the top sides. But they will have to look over their shoulder a little bit. Indeed. Because there are coming forces behind them, and I think it's to the benefit of the competition now that instead of Romania, who are kind of a lesser Georgia in some
very
ways,
physical themselves, they were the only team that could even remotely kind of deal with Georgia's physicality on any level, and therefore the most competitive when they were the most competitive. But now you have in Spain Los Teros, a very different kind of picture. You have a dynamic, expansive, quick tempo kind of team, less physical in the tight exchanges, will undoubtedly be looking to avoid scrums and even rucks against Georgians. Protracted rucks not a good thing for them, but they get the ball wide.
They score pretty tries.
Nice tries.
Their coach has been talking about being inspired by Japan and using their World Cup success as sort of an impetus and a momentum setter to get their squad excited about the game, because they feel like their attributes in terms of the players they have and the qualities that they have are quite suited to that Japanese style of rugby.
100%.
Playing the ball quickly, getting outside bigger teams and scoring tries against them.
High tempo. You can see like there's examples in South American rugby of the way to do it. I think actually Georgia toured Argentina a few years ago, and Argentina showed a way to beat the Georgians that is all about keeping the tempo high, keeping the rucks few and the tries many.
Yes.
And that's exactly the way you go about it. You don't get into an arm wrestle in Tbilisi with these guys. You try and work it around them. And I think they're well set up to do it. They have some really nice players at the fly half. They have Manuel Ordaz, who's been starting for Bayonne again, and it's nice to see tens in this tournament getting regular top level starting berths in a top couture's shirt.
Ordaz made his debut earlier this year, coming off the bench in the game against Portugal, and now a starter for Bayonne in a couple of games this year, which is always exciting.
Great stuff.
Getting guys playing top couture's rugby, top division rugby as a starter is a real a boost for a tier 2 side.
It is, and it is to our credit. We rail on the top couture's a lot, but this is the thing that they do best in the world, is giving platforms to guys, tens from tier 2 countries like this, tier 2 guys in general, Fijians, Georgians, now Spaniards all getting a chance to play in the top couture's, and that is really a credit to them. And it's good to see Spain coming for us. They haven't always been, but they definitely have a bit of momentum coming into this year's tournament.
The only thing that they are the best team placed to unseat Georgia. They move the ball very well. If they are to beat Georgia, it will be with high tempo and tries. They had the crack at them in Madrid last year. They lost the game, I think 23 points to 10, which is a typical enough Georgian result. And now this year they do have to go to Tbilisi, which is harder again.
It is.
It's some long travel and obviously home field advantage for the Georgians, but without crowds, you wonder, like, it's not the same thing.
No, it's conditions are different. That's the only factor, are just like weather conditions and ambient temperatures. But they'll go.
They'll go and have a go at it. I mean, they're definitely in a better place. The Belgian game is put behind them. That horrible not qualifying for the last World Cup.
Yes,
all of that's in the past. The last World Cup's in the past, and they've emerged now, I think, firmly as the second best team in this competition, and in a great position to go and qualify automatically for a World Cup.
Because you don't need to unseat Georgia to gain automatic qualification, and that is a proper scrap. They do need to mind, just as we said, the ineligible players, because that diddled them out of the last time as well. Like they weren't alone in it, but you need to just field eligible players.
I don't even know what's going on with the ineligible players, but for the love of God, stop. I don't want to watch a game and then hear some stuff.
I just don't want to follow a whole saga about oh no, the tournament finished, this team, and this team. Georgia are automatically qualified, but this team, and this team all fielded ineligible players at this point, so Russia are going to the World Cup. What? Like, that can't happen again. No, don't allow it to.
No, please. Let's just have this tournament be about the rugby for once.
Yes.
Coming in behind Spain, I would say as third seeds going into this. This is kind of an open question because I have actually Romania, who technically finished second after
with the 28-0 walkover. So they were in last prior to that walkover.
Yeah, so I have Romania in fourth, and I have Portugal in third.
Portugal, we for those who were following our podcast, we did go in. They had a 2-test series against Brazil earlier or last year towards the tail end, which they won comfortably. Playing again similar to Spain, high tempo rugby against Brazil. kind of like Georgia on a much lesser level. They like a scrum. They're a bit more physical, a little slower tempo, and by God, like Portugal just took them to the cleaners with accurate, quick play, striking off set piece, striking in the middle of the field, like just looking
passing
quick.
really well, moving the ball, getting to the extremities, expanding the whole field, doing it with accuracy.
Yeah.
At times, like Spain, they can make mistakes.
No, they are nowhere near the complete package, but they're exciting.
They're going about it the right way, and they are exciting. They have good skill sets and good speed, and they're Los Lobos, the Wolves.
Los Lobos, the Wolves, indeed.
They are still behind Spain, and I think that 27-11 defeat they had at the start of the month, wrapping up last year's competition,
was revealing of the level.
Yeah, it was very much a flexing of muscle from Spain, and they comfortably had them
for two teams that try and play a similar brand that are kind of neighbours as well. Yeah, no, there was a class difference there, but there's not an insurmountable one necessarily. They will be targeting again World Cup qualification, the goal for all of these teams. Ultimately, by hook or by crook, they won't complain if they have to go through a repechage and then ultimately end up getting there. That's what the goal is. And the curious tidbit that you brought up, the last time Portugal were in the World Cup was the last time the World Cup was in France.
Yeah,
they
only got promoted last year. Last year was their first year back in the competition. They were more than competitive.
Yeah,
and if they can have a similar step up in this season, they could well be competitive with the likes of Spain and Georgia, and position themselves at least going into next season to be in a position where they could maybe pip Spain if results go their way, and they could get that automatic qualification.
Or at the least get themselves into the repechage and give themselves a fighting chance to get in there. So the Los Lobos not to be underestimated, and another team that play with a bit of flash and a bit of tempo. So it could be a very pretty tournament. They're certainly a welcome addition this year. And then finally, next up we will move on to Romania. Finally, we will put them in fourth, which is probably where they're due. Maybe not though. I don't know. It's tough to know. There are a few changes to them. They have been a bit of a diminishing force over the last few years, as we've alluded to, but they've spent a lot of money in pandemic time. Unlike most unions, they built a brand new stadium for their club side and now for their international side, which has undersoil heating, because apparently one of the things that was precluding them from being in the Challenge Cup, the second tier of European club competitions, they had a team in there, but their pitch was frequently frozen over at the time of the game and unplayable, and so they were ruled out. So they've spent the money, they've got the undersoil heating in there, they have a stadium. They've not quite got it annexed by their government for football purposes, which was a rumour. What is the
latest on that?
I haven't seen any updates, but it was in the rumour mill that one of their sport minister, I think, wanted to just be like, here's a perfectly good stadium for football. Why are we giving it to rugby?
Why are we being built to rugby?
I
have no idea how the stadium went about being built, but it is a funny one.
Yeah, it happened in lockdown when they built it, which is crazy, because other nations, richer nations than Romania, some would say, are scrambling for funds.
There's some benefactor there.
Must be, because the other thing they have is a brand new head coach, a familiar face, Andy Robinson, who has Six Nations experience, certainly is one of the highest just in terms of reputation, is one of the highest kind of paid or most
in tier 2. You mean
in tier 2? Yeah, one of the kind of most experienced coaches they probably ever hired and ever had. Certainly has a reputation for gritty teams as well, which doesn't necessarily.
I didn't love his contributions to either England or Scotland way back in the day. I mean, I'm curious is the word for how Romania are going to look, because they're up against teams who are going to be making no mistake about driving a high pace, and they're going to have to try and live with that. And it'll be interesting with all this investment, whether it's the right investment. I haven't seen Andy Robinson coach a team in a while, so it's true. Anything's possible. Yeah. He could look really good.
He could be a matchmate
and experience. Could weigh well on his head.
It could be a stylistic matchup that suits them. You never know. Like he does like to play kind of slow, physical, kind of defensive-minded teams. He does that a lot. Yeah. So Romania could present that picture in the context of this. It could work as a marriage. The question is just, do they have the quality these days? We haven't seen it from them in a few years. Are we going to see something else? It is, with that World Cup carrot attached to this tournament, it adds a significance for all these teams, and Romania will be no different. Having invested all that much, they're going to want to be at the World Cup to get some of that money back. Yeah. So you're going to see all of these teams up for the fight. It's a bit of an unknown quantity, Romania.
At their very best, they tend to be sort of dynamic and physical and powerful. Good loose forwards is what you'd associate with them. A decent kicking game, actually. Yeah. I remember them kicking their way to victory at the World Cup in 2015. I want to say it was over Tonga, but it was that was Georgia who beat Tonga. They had a win.
Yeah, I can't recall that one.
Where they kicked their way to victory against the side. I remember them nearly beating Italy in 2011 as well. Or was it Scotland in 2011 in New Zealand.
Oh, they have pedigree and they have history in the game.
Yeah, I think this competition and Tier 2 rugby in general is better for having a good Romania. And I think that the investment, if nothing else, and the hiring of Andy Robinson, whether it's getting things right or not, is definitely
it's trying things.
Evidence of them being committed to a future for Romanian rugby, which is a good thing to see.
Exactly, the future going forward, and as well, this is a very important year this year and next year for all of these teams. Qualification for the World Cup, very, very important. And with that, we will move on to the last team in the competition currently. Obviously, Belgium are still up there based on last year's thing. They could still be in there, but that is undecided. But we do have Russia still in, who were the last team from this. They did go to the last World Cup, granted on a technicality, but they will still be in with the fight as well. They have a few good players. They're kind of still lucky to be playing in this competition because their 2020 form was pretty dismal.
It was up and down, wasn't it? I mean, they got hosed by Spain. They had a tough loss to Georgia just at the end of the tournament. They did beat Romania. They did nick a home win against Portugal, and then had a 38-12 defeat to Belgium. In the middle of all that,
bizarrely, so they
still have a lot of the same heads that we would have seen at the World Cup. Gadzeev, I think, is still there, and still, as we all know, as anyone who watched the World Cup knows, he can be, on his days, a really classy operator. He does a lot of good stuff. But they're in sort of a so-so position. But I still think their best chance of qualification is probably for someone else to field ineligible players.
It might be. It has been in the past.
They're not like as million miles away as you might think, though. Like they could put together a run of games where they nick wins and they find that kind of World Cup form, which I think is their ceiling. I think they put in their best showing possible at the World Cup,
which is a credit to them.
It is
genuinely. The way they played that first game, they were at the curtain raiser with Japan, and they gave them a few scares. You know,
they had good moments in games, but even so, I mean, if you look at the scoring return, it was 10 points against Japan, 9 against Samoa. None against Ireland and none against Scotland. But there was 19 points in 4 games, despite playing well and showing good hustle. So it's that it's getting points on the board that is gonna have to be a point of emphasis for them as well. But I think if they come out and show us the best of them and move the ball well and frustrate teams and turn balls over and not allow these teams, who are all vulnerable in their own way because it's all Tier 2, not allow them to get settled in the game and move the ball and control where the game is played and nick wins, then they could be in a position to qualify. And I think all of these teams, like Russia might be the lowest ranked team, but are you kidding yourself if they're not thinking about qualifying for a World Cup as well? Because they always are.
They always 100% are. And I wouldn't write anything. It's quite an open tournament, just given the fact that the qualification is on the line. And as far as Russia is concerned, macro things, it would be nice to see a few young players come through for them. Certainly a bit more speed in the back line by and large. That's one thing I remember from them. They're all pretty
have like Artemiev.
They're pretty physical as a back line. Like, I suppose for a Tier 2 level, they're not like dealing with top tier physicality, but they also just don't quite have speed. Like, their wingers were a little bit robust and kind of good on defense and not all that quick. It would be nice to see a little bit more speed emerge through young talent for them. All of those are kind of macro thoughts, though.
Those are the teams, and that's sort of the order we have them in. I think favourites wise, Georgia clear favourites. But Spain really Spain. Spain could be, if there is a scenario where someone knocks off Georgia, it's probably Spain. But I think you could get some good games. And for those who are uninitiated, they do start this weekend. There's no Test Rugby, no Six Nations Rugby, which I think is a perfect weekend for them to start the competition.
100%. In the gap week, have a little thing.
For those who are starved of international rugby, you're going to have a back-to-back Saturday afternoon showing. First game between Russia and Romania is at 12 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. That's UK and Ireland time. Midday. It's obviously 3 o'clock local time. Russia 3 hours ahead, but that's Russia against Romania. And then 3 hours after that, Portugal, Georgia.
There you go.
A couple of good games. Russia beat Romania last year. Romania, obviously, all this investment, all this hype. A loss away to Georgia to start the tournament away to Russia to start the tournament is pretty disastrous.
Catastrophic.
Given the games against Portugal and games against Portugal and Spain and Georgia to come. A loss for either of these teams is going to put them really up against it to qualify for the World Cup straight away.
So stakes are high for game 1, and then Portugal v Spain as well. Portugal v Georgia, I should say. It's certainly a clash of styles. Portugal, as we said, going to try and set a high tempo in the sunshine in Portugal. Portugal going to try and move the big Georgians around, score some tries. Georgia, conversely, going to try and keep that tempo down, try and make it more.
Are they?
No, I think they are. I think they're going to make it not down on, like, in terms of slow necessarily. They're going to try and increase their own tempo, but compared to the way Portugal will ideally play the game, they'll want it slower, they'll want it more physical, they'll want to back themselves to the scrum. They will want to implement, as we were saying, better kicking games, better exit games, be more clinical.
They get plenty of ball. They need to be more clinical. They need to move teams around. Like these defences aren't of the highest quality, and they need to trust themselves to pick angles off one another, not dissimilar to the conversations you have about Ireland. Just attack with a bit more willingness to find scores on plays, running lines off each other, looking for offloads, finding seams and putting scores on teams, as opposed to just winning the physical battle and then grinding out a 15-point win, which is what they so often do.
They'll want to try and convert some bonus points in this competition, but they'll also want to escape Portugal without a banana skin defeat to put them on the back foot, and that's mission one, and I'd expect they are favourites for it, as they are for the tournament. But there's definitely a scenario where Portugal catch them with their pants down in week one and throw the whole tournament open.
What a statement that would be from Los Lobos.
Indeed, So, that tournament, which is always brilliant, does kick off this weekend, and we are thoroughly looking forward to it. And for all our Tier 2 fans out there, who you got? How confident are you feeling? Let us know in the comments down below.
Go on, Rugby Europe. Good to see Tier 2 footy back in action. I'm looking forward to it. Another great season ahead.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you very much for tuning into the Overlap Rugby podcast. If you're new here, please do like and subscribe and ring the bell as well so you'll be notified when we upload. But mainly drop a comment down below as well. We love hearing your thoughts on the rugby. Cheers.